The aids. The principles of training would be incomplete if they did not include the means of communication between horse and rider. If success is to be obtained, the highest standard of understanding must be reached between the two living creatures concerned. This is as true for the commanding partner, the rider, as it is for the executing one, the horse. The rider must be a psychologist in order to understand, from the smallest signs, the behavior of his horse and act accordingly. To be successful, he must have the same qualities as a good teacher and know how to make himself understood by the pupil entrusted to his care. At all times, riding masters have tried to compile a means of communication between horse and rider, as it were, the director of the executing partner. In the oldest book on riding in existence, Xenophon writes about aids and punishments. To these two mediums for the education of the horse another might be added, namely rewards, which could even be placed before punishment. In his book, in 1623, Pluvinel stated, "The art of riding is based on reward and punishment." These three factors are the elements of communication between horse and rider, and being the language between the two, they must be clear and simple. As the child is taught single words before full sentences, so must the horse gradually learn what is demanded from him by the different aids. Equestrian language has coined the word aids to give it a deeper meaning than others. The rider should aid his horse to understand him. This means that the horse should never be afraid of the aids and that the rider has sufficient patience to ensure his horse understands what is demanded of him. The rider must have an exact understanding of his aids and their effect, and must make use of them intelligently. He must not allow himself to be influenced by his feelings. To follow this policy must be the constant aim of every good and successful rider. There is a close relationship between aids, punishments, and rewards. Correctly and justly applied, they will prove their value as means of education, will complement each other in the course of training. The actions of the aids and punishments may overlap because every aid can be increased to the degree of punishment. Therefore, the different aids should first be carefully considered before resorting to punishment, always remembering that reward is of greater importance than punishment. The rider must have not only a thorough knowledge of the means at his disposal, but also be able to decide at what moment and to what measure they should be applied. The number of aids is limited, but they can be applied in a great number of different combinations. The aids are addressed to the following senses of the horse: sight, hearing, and responsiveness to touch. Sight plays the smallest part. Its main role is to convert the natural fear of the horse for strange objects or of human beings into confidence. Hearing is of greater importance. The hearing of the horse is extremely well developed and far more receptive to any variation of sound that is generally assumed. The oldest riding masters made use of this fact and employed certain melodies for different exercises. These methods do not appear to have been of great value, for otherwise they would have been made more use of in modern times. The fact remains that the horse will react well to the tone of voice. A smooth and quiet tone will tend to calm him and be accepted as a reward, whereas rough words will convey a threat or even a punishment. The click of the tongue or the sound of the riding whip may be used as stimulation, as may also the crack of the sound of the lash of the long whip being dropped on the ground. The greatest number of aids are addressed to the horse's responsiveness to touch, to such an extent that the fully trained school horse it must be the only means of conveying the rider's will. For this reason, it is of most importance to preserve and develop the sensitiveness of the horse's mouth, and to cultivate and make use of the reactions of the horse's body to the legs of the rider. The distribution of weight will also influence the movement of the horse, so that the upper part of the rider's body plays an important part in giving the aids. The aids are thus divided into those which can be heard and those which a horse feels, with the latter divided into visible and invisible aids. The ultimate objective of training must be to guide the horse with invisible aids. Two creatures, the one who thinks and the other who executes the thought, must be fused together. This is the ideal of classical riding. For this reason, the dressage test demanded at the Olympic Games must be ridden without a whip and without the use of voice. In spite of this, few riders today are sufficiently expert in the art of classical riding to perform the movements with invisible aids. Rather, they may be often seen presenting their horses while working with hands and legs and swinging their bodies. The aids as a whole may be classified as follows: pushing aids, leg aids, weight aids, click of the tongue, spurs, riding whip, and long whip. The stopping aids, rein aids, back and weight aids. The preventing aids, leg aids, unilateral action of the reins. The degree of the aids must depend on the sensitiveness of the horse as well as the phase of his training. An aid strong enough to obtain the required effect with a lazy or inattentive horse could be looked upon as a punishment with a more sensitive one. The aids may be subdivided according to the degree of their application, refined, increased, and strong. The coordination of the different aids must never be overlooked. Strong aids should rarely, if ever, be applied to green horses. With a thick-skinned or unresponsive horse, they should come into action only for a short time and must be replaced as soon as possible by increasing aids. The increasing aids will begin with the light application and gradually be increased, without roughness, until the horse reacts. This is the first step towards refined aids, to which the horse must react upon the slightest application. This is the path to the invisible aids. As a sculptor would first shape his future work of art from a rough stone with swift and strong blows of the chisel, and as it progresses, work on the details with more and delicate strokes in order to produce the finished article in all its beauty, so must the rider become more and more refined as the training proceeds. The rider must always remember this and be careful not to be carried away by impatience or temper and destroy with rough aids what he has built up in his previous work. Following the parable of the sculptor, it would be the same as if, by careless or coarse stroke of his chisel, he destroyed his otherwise satisfactory emerging work. Forward is the essence of training. The rider's legs, from the thigh downwards, must be in touch with the horse's body. The lower legs on the girth or immediately behind it will make the horse's hind legs step more under his body and make him go forward with energy. The effect of the legs must become more and more refined in the course of training. With a green horse, this aid will be at first short and distinct action of the lower leg. When the horse has responded, the rider's legs will remain in touch with the horse's sides in the normal position of accordance with the correct seat. There is nothing worse for training than the legs that are continuously kicking the horse's sides. In the end, the more the legs work, the less would be in response. It is equally wrong to maintain a strong pressure on the horse's sides, as this would only tire the rider and make the horse unresponsive to the legs. The pressure of the rider's legs must be decreased the moment the horse has responded to his demands. When the leg is correctly applied, the heel should be low and the muscles of the calf tightened, so that the horse, with correctly rounded body, will receive the stimulation and go briskly forward from the application of the rider's thighs, knees, and calves. In the course of training, the aids of the legs must become refined to such an extent that the horse will react to the rider by simply pressing more firmly into the stirrup. Both legs applied on the girth will push the horse forward. The single leg applied behind the girth will have either a preventing effect that will stop the hindquarters deviating to that side or falling out, or, if the pressure is increased, will make the horse yield with his hindquarters to the opposite side. One leg pushing forward on the girth and the other pushing sideways behind the girth will make the horse go forward and sideways, that is to say, perform lateral work. The pushing aids can be supported by the aids of the rider's back. The back aids are of much more importance than is often supposed. If the upper part of the body is taken slightly behind the vertical line, while the rider remains firmly in the saddle, the horse will go forward. Wonders can be achieved if the body is inclined backwards, even when the legs are applied, at the same time the reins are given, especially with a young horse that will not approach a certain object. These visible back aids must be used only at the beginning of training. The well-trained horse should go forward when the rider sits deeper in the saddle. When the weight of the body is transferred into the direction of the lateral movement, it will support the effect outside the leg because the horse will try to step under the center of gravity of the rider. A man carrying another on his shoulder will step to the left side and not to the right if the burden leans to the left. For the school horse, it will be an aid if the rider sits a little more firmly to the seat bone in the direction of the movement. On the other hand, the rider should be warned against twisting his body as many do when trying to teach new exercises to a horse. Aids of this kind are incorrect. Why should a horse be taught by aids that would later have to be replaced by others? These aids are unsightly, whereas rider and horse should always be a pleasure to look at. As has already been mentioned, horses have a good sense of hearing. For this reason, the click of the tongue will assist the other pushing aids to make them go forward. But the rider must be careful not to make too much use of this aid, as the horse would soon become accustomed to it and cease to respond, as happens with too active a leg. This is one of the greatest dangers to success in training. Also, the rider must be careful that the click of his tongue is heard by only his horse and not by others present. The spur should be used only in the advanced stages of training, and only when required to reinforce pushing aids. The use of the spur is the last resort, and as with other things in life, the last resort should be reserved for emergencies. The spur should touch the horse's side with an increased pressure of the leg, and the application should be discontinued the moment the aid has obtained the required result. The spur should never be used sharply as an aid, because it would then be no longer an aid, but a punishment. The rider must take great care not to make too much use of his spurs. There would be the danger of the horse becoming unresponsive, and the rider would lose his last resort. Jerky movements, nervous, and twisting of the tail are often the result of incorrect use of the spur. The riding whip is another pushing aid. It can be used with young horses and with making greater demands with advanced horses. The use of the whip begins with just touching the horse's body, and increases to a light tap, but should never degenerate into a harsh blow. The whip should be used just behind the rider's leg, but with very young horses it may be used on the shoulder. It is used behind the girth to support the sideways pushing aid, or to teach respect for the preventative leg. The rider should avoid touching the hindquarters with the whip, especially with young horses, as this may lead to kicking. The use of the long whip demands very carefully considered action. It may be used by the instructor or an experienced man to support the rider's legs, in order to help him with a young horse, or with the more difficult exercises. Experience is necessary because when using the long whip, the difference between the aid and punishment is very indistinct. The horse should never be afraid of the whip, as it would then be of no use as an aid. It should give the horse energy and make him move more briskly, but should never make him jump away in fear. Generally, it would be sufficient to show the whip to the horse in order to make him go forward or sideways. If the trainer wants to push his horse forward, he must take a position more towards the hindquarters than to the shoulders. But if this object is to push the horse sideways, his position must be more towards the shoulder. If showing the whip to the horse does not obtain the required result, the point of the whip must be raised and dropped to the ground in the direction of the horse. Finally, this aid must be further increased by lightly touching the horse with a lash in the spot where the leg aid should be applied. The long whip should never be applied to the legs or quarters of the horse. This would only irritate him, cause unlevel steps, and make him kick. The use of the long whip is of value only when it is used in conjunction with the rider's pushing aids. As the obedience of the horse to the aids increases, so must the assistance of the whip be withheld until finally it is discontinued. When the horse has responded to the use of the whip, he should be shown it or even caressed with the handle and made of in much more prevent him from becoming afraid of it. All aids must be taken into consideration with sensitiveness, the temperament, and the degree of training of the horse. The horse must never be frightened or surprised by the aids. The aids of the reins are the counterpart in the above-mentioned aids. They control the forward urge of the horse. By carefully adjusting the cooperation of the pushing aids, they improve the carriage, collection, and raising of the forehand, and thus assist the physical training of the horse. The rein aids also direct the horse into the direction demanded by his rider. They should be applied in short actions and never revert to pulling or jabbing. The pressure of the bit on the bars should be gradually increased and then gradually decreased, but not given suddenly. The above-mentioned aids consist of taking and giving, the latter being of the greater importance. The action of the reins will consist of repeated and short actions in order to allow them to pass through the body and not be held up, as it were, by the horse stiffening because the aids are too prolonged. With young horses, the whole arm of the rider must be employed to give the aids, but the ideal action of the reins with a fully trained horse will be brought about by the rider simply turning his hands without moving his arms, elbows, or shoulders. To be able to give the aids by simply turning the hands is of the ultimate aim of training and can be achieved only by long and systematic work. A well-trained horse will immediately respond to a rider just closing his hands as if squeezing water out of a sponge. The taking, yielding, and holding aids will be distinguished by their effects. The taking action of the rein will make the horse follow with his head and neck and turn in the direction of the applied rein. The action should be as short as possible in order to prevent the horse from becoming dull and unresponsive. As soon as the horse answers, the aid will be changed to a yielding one. If, with a young horse, the first action with the reins does not lead to success, the reins should yield and the action must be repeated until success is obtained. The action of the reins must never degenerate into a steady pull. This would lead to a tug of war between the horse and rider, and the horse, having the greater power, would be the victor. The action of the reins should never be applied from a loose rein, as this would lead to a jerk. The unilateral action of the rein will make the horse turn, and, with the support of the other rein, will influence the hind leg on that side, thus reinforcing the sideways pushing aids of the rider to prevent the quarters from flying out. The action of the inside rein supports the rider's inside leg and prevents the hindquarters from falling in, whereas the action of the outside rein will influence and reinforce the outside leg behind the girth, which will prevent the hindquarters from falling out. This outside rein will define the degree of this position of the horse's head and the lateral bend of his body and the size of the turn. If the outside rein is not applied, the horse will not execute a turn, but follow the action of the inside rein by bending only his neck. When riding on the track in an arena, the side nearest to the wall is known as the outside, and the other side the inside. But when inside the arena away from the wall, the side towards which the horse is bent is known as the inside, and the other the outside. The rein is named according to the direction to which the horse is being ridden, or to the side which he is turning. For instance, when turning to the left, he is on the left rein, and vice versa. The rein aids will be effective only when used in cooperation with the back aids of the rider. With the support of the rider's braced back, the action of the reins will decrease the tempo and increase collection. Rein aids alone, without assistance of the back aids, would merely make the horse lie on the bit or even get out of control. When the rider's back is braced, the action of the reins on the horse's mouth is transferred through the hands, shoulders, and spine of the rider to the muscles of the horse's back and hindquarters. The important role of the rider's body is to coordinate the rein and leg aids. Therefore, the rider's seat must be independent and well balanced. If this is not so, the incorrect position of the body may falsify the effect of the aids. If the rider leans forward while his seat remains in the saddle, he will drive the horse's forelegs into the ground and prevent the hind legs from coming under the body. With a straight horse, the action of one rein will have a checking effect on the hind leg of the same side. The action of both reins will therefore make the horse reduce his speed. The coordination of all aids, especially of the pushing and stopping aids, is of the utmost importance. Experience has taught that the rider should never push more with his legs than he can control with his reins, or hold with his hands more than he can absorb with his legs and seat. This gives the individual measure of the degree of the aids. Most riders will have an inclination to hold more with the reins than they can control with their legs. Therefore, the rider must always work from the rear to the front to ensure the horse does not take too firm a contact with the bit. At the Spanish riding school, the unilateral half halt is considered to be of great importance with the horse that takes an uneven contact with the bit or are stiff on one side. The rein on which the horse does not accept the contact is firmly applied, and the increased position of the horse's head to the side is corrected by the short actions of the rein on the opposite side, making the head and neck straight. These short actions must be supported by the rider's legs, pushing forward, and the half halts must be repeated until the contact is equal on both sides. The regular forward movement must not be interrupted by the aid. As with all principles of the art of riding, the aids, to be successful, may be correctly coordinated. Special attention should be paid to applying them always in the same manner and in order not to confuse the horse. The horse clings to his habits more than any other living creature. He will notice the least change in his surroundings or in the arena. Sometimes he will not feel at ease with a strange arena, and his attention will be distracted by other horses working near him. This would show itself in inattention to the rider. The aids will help the rider to hold the attention of the horse both physically and mentally, in spite of what is going on around him, so that he will concentrate entirely on his work. Sometimes he will be induced by boredom to cause difficulties by shying or bucking without any cause, just to enjoy himself. This should not be allowed. Once more, it must be impressed upon the rider that pushing aids are of greater importance than restraining aids. The range of aids that the rider has at his disposal will make him realize this fact. The whole line of conduct, including the aids, upon the art of riding is based and may be summed up in a simple sentence. Riding forward is the essence of correct training.